Good morning. Good morning, friends and neighbors. How's everyone doing? Oh, so many familiar faces today. So exciting. I see Amy and Linda and Annie and Tasia and Kira, all these wonderful folks. Good morning. How are you all? Good. Okay, my name's Crystal Page. I'm the communication director for the Conrad Prebys Foundation. If you are on our board, will you raise your hand so folks know who to talk to? Just kidding. This is our awesome board. If you're on staff, please raise your hand. Okay, we are so happy to have you all here. This has been 2 years in the making. This board, this staff, you all as community have sat down with our executive director, CEO. Keep coming on in. We're happy to have you here. I'm going to do some housekeeping and then we'll get started. So first of all, who has been here before to the Conrad? Awesome. If you have not, please know they opened the door to us. Plan to come back. I saw Payare with the Black Mozart last year. They had the lightning and the thunder, and it's just such a beautiful space, right? Yes, so first of all, thank you to the Conrad. Okay, bathrooms, go back that way, out to the right. If you need to go, handle your business, come on back, not a big deal. Lunch will be provided. We have a box lunch for all of you to chat, network. You all told us you really want to be in community, so take advantage of the moment. After this, talk to each other. What does it mean? And then we'll be back in October again. More about that later. In case of an emergency, look out for each other. Exits are right there. You know, let's look out for each other, take care of one another. Up and out, don't trample people. Hopefully there's no emergencies. I'm gonna be very real. If you cannot hear or have any other need, please raise your hand and we'll help you. Can everyone hear pretty okay? Yes, okay. Now, you're gonna see on the screen at some point our URL, prebysfoundfdn.org. Visit us, connect with us. We're here to build community. So I'm gonna invite Todd out. Todd is the president and CEO of the La Jolla Music Society, who leads initiatives and operates the Conrad. Todd, will you join us?
Good morning and welcome to the Conrad. We're thrilled to have all of you here, and we're thrilled to have the Conrad Prebys Foundation here. Thank you for thanking us for having you here, but honestly, the real thanks go to Conrad, who helped make this building happen and help support many, probably all of you here in the community, so we're grateful to him. Conrad was a very close friend of our organization, as you may have guessed. What you may not know is that he was a trained pianist, and he deeply loved classical music. He would sit on the front row of our performances and would be deeply moved by hearing string quartets and pianists and the concerts. And so he was thrilled that this building was being built. He did not live to see its opening. We opened in 2019, but he was giddy at the idea of it going up. And those of you who knew Conrad know that giddy is a good word for him, because he would get very excited about things. In fact, when the building nickname was suggested, we call ourselves the Conrad, he was thrilled because everyone all of his life would mispronounce his last name. So he thought, this is a great way to avoid that and just call it the Conrad. So he was fully endorsing of the name. We opened 4 years ago. It's kind of odd to think that we've been around for 4 years. I've been here less than that, but I've been around. I've been attending performances of this organization for more than 20. We've been open for 4 years, and even with the closing of the pandemic during the quarantine that we all went through, we are back at it and hard. We will have more than 220 active days in this building this year. Although some of those are ours, nearly 100 are ours, many of them are not our performances. They are yours. Some of the people in this hall have rented this space or will be renting this space for their own performances or events or meetings or fundraisers. One example is the Visual and Performing Arts Foundation, which raises money for arts programs in public schools, recently had their gala here to raise money for children's education programs. Another upcoming fundraiser here will be for Voices of Our City. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but this is the choir that supports people affected by homelessness, and the singers are unhoused residents who sing in the choir, and they actually rehearsed here recently, but they will have their gala later in the year. And that is part of our mission, is to be part of this community, to be a service to the community. I truly see us as a service organization. We don't just serve the audiences in the seats, which is the obvious group, but we serve students in the schools that we go to. We see ourselves as serving the artists on the stage by providing them a platform to hone their craft and have an audience to perform for. And I feel like we really serve the art form. But in the end, we should be here serving the community, and I think that's what today is all about. We want to serve all of San Diego. We want you to be a part of it. We hope you'll be back often. Please reach out to us if you ever have any questions. We'd love to partner with you and be a part of your organizations. And I see some of our renters here today, so it's nice to have you with us. With that, I think I'll turn it back over to the Prebys Foundation. Thank you very much for being here, and enjoy your day.
All right, how is everyone? Okay, we're gonna just take 3 deep breaths because this is gonna be a very real conversation. So just breathe in through your nose, out through your mouth. I always tell my son, breathe in through your nose, all the good stuff, out through your mouth, all the yucky stuff. Running late, traffic, all that. One last time, in through your nose, out through your mouth. Okay, so you are welcome here, you belong here. Whether you moved here from New York 5 years ago, or whether you founded a nonprofit, you grew up here and you were driven by that. No matter what you look like, what abilities you do or don't have, what level of education or income you earn, you belong here and you are welcome. We're so happy to have you all here the day after a holiday. I know some of you probably rolled out of bed. I don't see any jammas here, so good job, everybody. We really do appreciate your partnership and your efforts to push us to open doors. So now we're gonna jump to the reason you're all here. So for that, I'll hand it to our CEO and president, Grant Oliphant, who we are so lucky to have. He inspires me every day, and I hope he inspires you. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. God, I love this town. And I love this moment, and I love being in Conrad's house for this conversation. Thank you for being a part of the magic of this moment. And I just want to say a few quick words about why here at the Conrad and why belonging, and then why John Powell. And just quickly, I think Crystal already addressed the why the Conrad, but looking around at this crowd, this community begins to express the notion that everybody in San Diego belongs here. And this is a community for everyone. And that ought to be the aspirational dream for everyone who lives here and for everyone who will live here. And it's such an extraordinary gift to be able in moments like this to celebrate that and embody that. So the reason for the Conrad was to honor Conrad's legacy, of course, but also to bring us together in a place that says we all belong everywhere in this amazing town. And I hope we all continue to feel that way. About belonging and why we're having this conversation this morning. Let me just say that when you're handed the reins to a legacy like Conrad left this foundation, it is daunting and intimidating. It is an extraordinary gift that he left San Diego, a foundation that on average should be throwing off about $45 to $50 million a year in gifts to the community for as long as any of us can imagine. And those numbers sound amazing. And then you think about the interests that Conrad left that for, and it includes healthcare and medical research and the arts. And as we looked at his legacy, at his extraordinary work in youth, And so we've decided also in supporting the success of youth, all amazing windows on what San Diego is and can be, and all filled with incredible demands and needs and extraordinary opportunities. And suddenly the gift that Conrad gave begins to feel more and more like a gift that comes with a challenge. And the challenge is how to make the most of the gift that he gave San Diego. And to really understand that, what our board and team and I began to do in a kind of deep way was to start looking for the threads that tied the work together in each of these areas. We started asking ourselves, if we can only make a small difference in any one of these areas, how might we, looking at it together, make an amazing difference worthy of San Diego across all of these areas? And what very quickly began to emerge for us was the theme of belonging. It emerged first because as we had conversations with people in the community, we heard about it over and over again, about the desire that people have to belong in this town. We also heard about the ways in which people, for various reasons, all over the map, felt as if maybe they didn't, or if maybe the doors of opportunity and purpose were not as open to them as they would have hoped in an extraordinary town like this. And so we began to think about it just at that level in terms of what we were hearing, but we also began to look at it in terms of the opportunity that San Diego represents. And let me tell you, when I come out here and say, I love this town, I love this town, partly because I have a very long and strange history with it, which we don't have time for, but also because I see the potential of it. And I believe the potential of it vastly exceeds what many of us currently believe it is. I think San Diego mirrors and echoes many of the problems that our country faces and our world faces. And I believe we have the resources here to figure out answers to those problems in ways that could become a model for our country and our world. And when I say I love San Diego, it is because I believe we can be the model that the world is looking for. And I think there shouldn't be an aspiration different from that when you're handed a gift that is about philanthropy and that is about caring for people and caring for each other. Imagine for a moment what we heard about belonging and then beginning to play that out across the range of issues that we care about. So we care about healthcare, and we have world-class healthcare in this community. But what if it was truly available and accessible to everyone in this community in a way that it presently isn't? We have some of the best medical research facilities in the world right here around us in La Jolla. What if those institutes could also model the best thinking in the world about who is on their research staff? Who is in the room when they are asking the questions about what to work on? Who is being studied when the studies and research projects are being shaped? Think about it from the perspective of the arts, where we have a vibrant, dynamic arts sector, and we're in one of the halls that embodies that. But imagine for a moment that this town could demonstrate what can happen when people from all neighborhoods and all communities not only feel like they belong in this hall, but also feel like their voice could belong up here on this stage. Or that everybody in this room would want to go to their neighborhood to hear their story and participate in their experience of belonging in San Diego. Imagine for a moment how this plays out with youth. And I don't have to tell anybody in this room the crisis that we all know is happening with youth in America, the challenges that people and young people face in terms of feeling a sense of agency and possibility. We're all privy to and witness to an extraordinary mental health crisis playing out in our community, not just for youth, but across the population. So much of this relates to the way in which we behave towards each other. We're also privy to a crisis around democracy and engaging with each other and just being able to have civil dialogue and talk to each other about what matters and what we might differ on and how we might think about things differently. Remember that? And we imagine that we cannot bridge these divides because we read about the crisis day in and day out, but this is not a crisis of mental health alone. This is not a crisis of our youth. This is a crisis of belonging. It is a sense of having agency over the communities in which people are a part and believing that they belong enough there to make a difference in that community. San Diego is an extraordinary town, but tomorrow it will be an even more amazing one because everybody in this room, I believe, believes what we believe, which is that working together we can do extraordinary and amazing things, not just in the arts, in healthcare, in medical research, working with youth, in the silos that we so often confine our lives to. We can instead think about what makes the quality of an extraordinary, awesome community of human beings. And that's the challenge that we have here. There's a poet named David White who has written a poem called The House of Belonging. And there's a little stanza of it that I want to share with you here. It says, and I would like you for a moment just to sit with the ways in which you feel you belong here, and the ways in which you find yourselves challenged to belong here. And imagine yourself saying, or your child saying, or a child in your life that you happen to know saying, "This is the bright house in which I live. This is where I ask my friends to come. This is where I want to love all the things it has taken me so long to learn to love. There is no house, no house, no house like the house of belonging." Do we not wish for that for every child, for every man and woman in this community, for everybody, no matter how they identify in this community, for everyone who is experiencing life through their personal eyes? Do we not want them to be able to say the same thing? Why John Powell to talk about this message? Because there is probably no more learned human being in the country on the idea of how practically and poetically you create a community like I just described. He is an extraordinary individual who has thought about this long and hard and walked many of us along a path of learning about how we think very broadly about the human enterprise, the human community, and now, I think incredibly fortunately for us, how San Diego can become not just a good city, not just an amazing city, not just a great city, but the best city imaginable as a place to belong. So now let me turn the program over to my colleague and partner in crime in this work, Kaberi Banerjee Murthy, who is our Chief Impact Officer. And let me just say about Kaberi that she's an extraordinary individual who, from day one, from the day I met her, challenged me to think about the very things I've been talking about here and to think about getting together as community to embody community, because the work is so much more than the money. And I also want to acknowledge the presence of her 2 young children in the audience, because she probably won't do that. But when our children are present, experiencing this kind of work, I think it deserves to be called out and applauded. And with that, let me hand it over to Kaberi. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Grant. And good morning, everybody. How is everyone today? How are we today? Excellent. I am very excited about today, and as Grant said, my 2 kids are not in school, but are here for a day of learning with Professor Powell alongside all of us. And I am so grateful that Professor Powell is here with us this morning. He is an extraordinary human who is leading the Center on Othering and Belonging at the University of California, Berkeley, a research institute that is bringing together scholars, community advocates, communicators, and policymakers to identify and eliminate the barriers to create an inclusive, just, and sustainable society, and to create transformative change to a more equitable world. And that's the kind of world I think we all want to live in. John and I met over a decade ago, and when he spoke about belonging at a philanthropic racial equity meeting, his analysis around targeted universalism immediately responded with me. I had a deep appreciation for what he shared with the group and welcomed any opportunity to talk with him and benefit from his wisdom over the years as he shared about universal goals and targeted solutions. His commitment to co-creating and co-owning structures that allow us to all belong is an inspiration to me, and I hope an inspiration to you as well. John is welcoming, kind, grounded, and brilliant. He always makes me feel that I can fit in and be myself, and he advocates for this for all of us as a way to feel and to be. As Prebys' Chief Impact Officer, I wanted to make sure that John was able to speak to our community directly because he brings a clear analysis around belonging that isn't some soft, hokey kumbaya stuff, but is indeed a sharp analysis around changing the systems that keep us all from creating a space of belonging. In order to build a place that works for all of us, we need to identify, transform, and eliminate barriers to inclusion, justice, and sustainability in San Diego. And I truly believe his wisdoms and his insights can help us make this work happen. So without any further ado, I'd love to be able to welcome John A. Powell.
Good morning. It's great to be here, and I feel like I have a PowerPoint, and I may get through it, I may not, but I feel like I don't have to. Grant and Kaberi just actually laid out what the challenge is, not just for me, but for all of you, and I think they did a beautiful job. So, as stated, my name is John Powell, and you probably know more about me than I know about you, but I know something about you as well. I think San Diego has already embraced these ideas, and what I'm here today is sort of maybe help you go a little bit deeper, and then later have questions and response to some of the things you're dealing with. I think, I hate that the PowerPoint is behind me, so I have to turn around, so excuse me for that. But let me just start by saying, what we're dealing with. First of all, we're dealing with the clicker. There it is. Okay. So, belonging, what's the opposite of belonging? And it's othering. And I say othering is the problem of the 21st century. And some of you will recognize that as a play off of W.B. Du Bois' statement that the 20th century, the problem of the 20th century was the color line. And so I want to expand that and basically say everywhere in the world, people are struggling with trying to belong and not belonging. And as already suggested, belonging is not just a academic concept. It's something that all of us feel. I remind people that every one of us was born attached to another human being. And even though this umbilical cord was cut, the spiritual connection to the other is never cut, not if we are to thrive. And so part of the thing is to recognize that we do things to deny our connection with each other. And what you're here today is reclaiming the notion that we are all connected in some profound way. So how do we divide each other? Well, we're very ingenious in this. You know, we create new things all the time. I mean, we know some of these, you know, race, gender, sexual orientation, age, disability. If you're in Rwanda, how many cows you have, what language you speak, how many, you know, what kind of clothes you wear. So all of these things can become important. What becomes particularly important is how a society organizes around them. So we don't organize around cows. I lived in Botswana. They organize around cows. To us, that might seem strange. A quick story, I was there living in Botswana, and people heard about America. It's like, I want to go to America. It sounds fabulous. Yes. People have their own house. Yes. Running water. Yes. And how many cows does everybody have? I said, well, most people don't have cows. What kind of place is that? The interest was gone immediately. So what's important to us is organized by our society. In the United States, that's been race. In India, that's been caste. I just got back from Europe, immigration, sometimes language, and it changes. We have different things that we use to say that someone doesn't belong. And so what we promote, to be clear, is belonging without othering. Belonging without othering. A lot of people are saying, okay, my group belongs, but that group does not belong. The challenge for us to say that everybody belongs, and then to create systems, structures, culture that expresses that. And belonging comes with something to it. It means, among other things, power, agency, and key to belonging is the co-creation. Now, oftentimes people will say, well, what do you belong to? And I like to tell the story that I'm going to give a party. And it's not just a story, I am going to give a party, and all of you are invited. But when you're invited, it's my party, my food. Okay, I'm an old black guy, grew up in Detroit, so Motown. A lot of Stevie Wonder, Marvin Gaye, and if you don't like it, I'm sorry. It's my party. You're invited, you're a guest. I'm not interested in your soundtrack. Okay, that's inclusion, where you're invited into someone else's space as a guest. And as a guest, you can ask the guest to leave at the appropriate time. You ask them to adhere and be obedient to those norms that were set before they got there. And that's a big step, inclusion. But belonging is saying, it's not my party, it's our party. Okay, so now I have to listen to your music too. I have to think about what you want. We have to negotiate that. It's our party. And so belonging is co-creation. It's not just what's there and you're inviting people in. It's saying, bring your full self, including your ideas. That yes, we come from different paths, we come from different countries, we come from different places, but we're all here together and we're moving to a common future. That's belonging. So it's really inclusion plus. And here are some of the ways that we can actually think about different ways of thinking about belonging. And I'm not going to turn around and read this, but you can read it. And I'll just share right now. I'll make the PowerPoint available as a PDF so you can have it and look at it at your leisure. Take this off. I think this will be a little bit better. One thing is that belonging is not the same as sameness. So sometimes when we deal with othering, we think the way to deal with it is to not notice that we have differences, not notice that some of us speak differently. I was just in Europe and someone says, "Oh, you have a North American accent." And that was delightful to hear because we don't realize that we have an accent, right? Accent, we think other people do. You have a British accent. You have a Canadian accent. I don't have an accent. So it's not collapsing all of us into the same. It's actually belonging says, bring your differences. And so you may love differently than I do. You may listen to different music. You may eat differently. You may have different values. Bring your full self. It's not saming. So we live in a very fragmented environment, and it's hard to actually practice this in a fragmented environment. One of the reactions to fragmentation, which sometimes people call polarization, I think polarization is a misnomer. Polarization suggests two poles, and the solution to polarization is move to the middle. And so I always say, so if you have a group of people who think enslaving people is right, necessary, and another group of people who think is wrong, take those poles, what's the solution? You move to the middle, so you enslave half the people, or people are enslaved on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, and free on Thursday, Friday. And so it's more complicated than that. There's fragmentation, and the fragmentation is affecting all of us. And it's hard to actually practice belonging in an environment that's deeply fragmented. So there are a couple of key concepts I want to leave you with. You've already heard one, talking about targeted universalism, and I'll come back to that. The other one is bridging. But let me talk about bridging by talking about its opposite. Bridging has actually become popular through Robert Putnam's work, Bowling Alone. And bridging suggests that you connect with someone who's apparently different and across some social cleavage that we consider important. And the opposite of bridging is breaking, where you actually look at the person who you think of as other and you tell a story about them that's pretty negative. And that story can be anything. But it's not just done at an individual level, it's done at a collective level. And I want to suggest that breaking is the practice that we're engaged in as a national pastime right now. And it's become weaponized. It's not just individuals breaking, it's actually being used by political parties, it's being used by the elites. People are telling you to be afraid of the other. And this is not just a US problem, it's a global problem. And the one reason it's a global problem is that when we experience anxiety, it's hard to connect. And the whole world is experiencing anxiety. What's the cause of that anxiety? It's not Republicans or Democrats alone, because it's global. It's happening in Europe. It's happening in South Africa. It's happening in Asia. There's something happening in the whole world that's causing us to break. And I won't go into great detail, but let me just say part of what's happening is change. We can only adapt to so much change in a short period of time without experiencing anxiety. That's not just true of us, it's true of most mammals. And the pace of change, in case you hadn't noticed, is actually speeding up. Our ability to change is not speeding up. So we're getting further and further behind. And that sort of really gets our nervous system excited. And there are two major stories in terms of how you deal with that change. And one story is, yeah, don't you feel anxious? Don't you feel diseased today? And it's her fault. And it's his fault. And it's your fault. It's those people that's making us feel nervous. It's those people that's taking our country away from us. It's those people that's taking our jobs away from us. It's those people that's taking our culture away from us. That's breaking. And so when you define the other as a threat to our very existence, and that story, again, is being told all over the world. So literally in India, there's statements by Modi. How do we make India great again? Now notice, you may have heard some version of that here in the United States. One thing that's interesting about those statements, and they're expressed by authoritarian leaders, whether it's in Hungary, whether it's in Turkey, whether it's in South Africa, it's always resorting back to an imaginary past. And in this imaginary past, life was simple. And what does a simple look like? Well, my wife cooked every day. I thought you were gay. Okay, well, all right, my husband cooked every day. But the point is, it's not a real past. It's an imaginary past. It's a past that says you don't have to be worried about the future because we're canceling it. We're going back to the past. And part of going back to the past means either getting rid of the other. So literally in India, they're saying we got to get rid of Muslims. They don't belong here. They've only been here over 2,000 years, but they're still outsiders. And they're stopping us from being a Hindu nation. So this imaginary past is what's held on to. Instead of, another way of dealing with this anxiety is to talk about a real future where we all belong. Now this is also challenging, but it's also beautiful. So how will we engage with this real future? It means, in part, stepping into our multiple identities. All of us carry multiple identities. And when we flatten people, when we other people, when we break with people, we don't see their multiple identities. You see one thing. So part of it is to embrace our multiple identities. So that's the different stories. Those are the two big stories. A story of fear about the future and resorting to the past, breaking, or a story about engaging the future and engaging each other. A story about listening to each other. A story about recognizing and building commonality. That's bridging. So what we say is that in order to promote belonging, you need to actually tell different stories. We need to step into being different people. We need to embrace our multiplicity and the multiplicity of the apparent other. Now, there are different kinds of bridges. There are what I call long bridges and short bridges, weak bridges and strong bridges. When I talked about bridging, I have to remind people I have a friend named Pastor McBride, and I was talking about bridging with the other, bridging with people who are different than you. And he says, so John, are you telling me I have to bridge with the devil? He's a minister. And I said, Michael, don't start there. But also be careful who you call the devil. Okay, but you're saying, oftentimes we think of bridging, we go to the most difficult situation and say, you're saying I got to bridge with this person? So start with your cousin. Start with short bridges until you get into the habit of exercising that muscle. Now, most of us, right, if we say, tomorrow I'm going to start running 26 miles a day getting ready for the marathon, okay, you're going to hurt yourself. So just start just going around the block. But start. And then after you get used to going around the block, now you can go a mile. And then maybe you'll get to 26 miles. So we suggest to people to start the process of bridging by building shorter bridges. And there's a fear in terms of building bridges. There's a fear of engaging to the other. Bridging just basically means you're listening to the other person's values and concerns. You're acknowledging the other person's humanity. And some people say, but what if the other person's wrong? It's a possibility. It happens. But they don't forfeit their humanity because they're wrong. And maybe you're wrong. So bridging doesn't require that you agree with someone. It doesn't require that you change their mind. It just requires that you listen and recognize we have a shared humanity. So how do we bridge in a fragmented world? Interesting. You can think about a bunch of islands separated from each other. How do you bridge? Interesting. Where do you need to bridge? Where there's a lot of little islands. The separation itself is calling you to bridge. If you live on a continent and there are no islands, you don't need bridges. Bridging is called for because we're practicing breaking, because we're practicing othering. And so therefore we have to be deliberate about practicing bridging. Now I've been talking about people, engaging with people. But a lot of work in terms of othering, in terms of saying you don't really belong, happens at a structural level, happens at a cultural level. I was sharing with one of the people today, I don't go to movies very often, but I'm anxiously looking forward to this weekend. I'm going to see The Little Mermaid. Now, some of you may not know, The Little Mermaid has become a very interesting story. Some people are upset that The Little Mermaid has pigment. How can that be? And so this cultural thing of saying the representation of black people in that role, man, for some people, that's scary. And another one is Cleopatra, right? There's a new Netflix out about Cleopatra, and she's cast as a black woman. And people are going crazy. Egypt was basically talking about banning Netflix from Egypt. Those people can't be in this role. What does that mean to me if Cleopatra is black? Next thing you'll be telling me is that this guy, Jesus, wasn't white. Ooh, I ain't going there. So structures and cultures do a lot of work. And it's complicated, right? I mean, if someone comes up in a wheelchair and there's no ramp, you basically said to the person, you don't belong here. If someone is deaf, and I see some of the work you're doing in San Diego is with the deaf community, how do you say to the deaf community you belong here? And it's not just you're saying it, how do they say it? How do they help make this their community? And so we don't pay attention to the work the structures are doing. It's not because we're bad people. It's we all have blind spots. So when you come to an escalator, you don't think, well, my cousin with a wheelchair, he can't get here. One of my favorite examples, I used to fly a lot, I'm starting to fly a lot again, is overhead luggage racks on an airplane. What's the problem with overhead luggage racks on an airplane? Well, if you're 6'3" or 6'4" like I am, not much. But if you're under 6 feet, if you're under 5'5", it starts to be a problem. Now, who's under 6 feet? What group is most likely to be under 6 feet and even under 5'5"? Women. Now, I heard the answer to that question immediately. I don't know if I heard any male voices in there, though. Men probably don't notice that as much, right? And the same group that's under 6 feet tends to have less upper body strength. Now, this last statement is very controversial, so I hope you don't get upset. But the third thing about this group is they tend to carry more luggage. So, women are smart. It's like they figured out that the structure is not working for them. So what they tend to do, women are overrepresented in groups that actually check luggage. So this is the solution to the structural problem. But it's a wonky solution. It's a clunky solution. It doesn't work. Because in order to do that, you got to get to the airport an extra hour early to check your luggage. And then leaving, you got to stay an extra 45 minutes. And then sometimes your luggage is not there. So the lesson is that individual interventions for structural problems don't work that well. Maybe that's all we have right now. But we could design airplanes differently. And if women participated fully, we would. So we're all situated in structures. And most structures work for us sometime and not other times. Like I said, I'm almost 6'4". When I was at the Ohio State University, they had a rule that if you're doing anything on company business, you had to rent a subcompact. And I said, no. And the dean of all things unimportant came to me. And he said, Professor Powell, this is a rule that's universal. We treat everybody the same. I said, that's stupid. You know, I tell the story, it's a true story. When I was 14 years old, I went to a sock hop, and there was this cute little kid playing at the sock hop. His name was Stevie Wonder. And he was playing his butt off. And I love Stevie Wonder, but I wouldn't ask him to drive me home. So it doesn't make sense to treat everybody the same. So I said to this guy, look, I'm not getting in a subcompact. I'll pay the difference in cost, but I'm not getting in a subcompact. The issue went all the way up to the chancellor. The chancellor didn't change the rule. He made a special dispensation for me. And so now it's like, there goes Professor Powell in his big car. He thinks he's all that. I'm just trying to be comfortable. So structures actually situate us differently. We're all situated in structures. Sometimes we don't notice that. Sometimes we notice the people and not the structures. And right now, there's a backlash against equity. And part of it is, it's complicated, is that equity tries to recognize structures. It says you don't treat everybody the same. And then some people who are trying to be magnanimous and say we're all the same, is to say that's not right. We should treat everybody the same. And equity people say, no, we shouldn't treat everybody the same. And people go back and forth and back and forth. Really, it's about situatedness. How do you treat people who are situated differently? Now, just as a footnote, this actually bleeds us in to what I call targeted universalism. Equity sometimes tell us to look at those disparities and treat people differently based on those disparities. It's actually deeper than that. It's our situatedness. When the container is broke, has cracks in it, everybody feels othered. Everybody feels like they don't belong. White men, straight men. I was talking to someone in the Senate. We do work in the Senate with Republicans and Democrats. And there was a guy there, and I don't think he would mind me. I won't tell you what state he's from, but I'll just tell you, he had a deep Southern accent. One Mississippi, well, anyway. And he said, we're talking about these kind of topics, we're having dinner with them, and we were talking not about politics, we want to talk about people's feelings, how people were navigating life, what was stressing people out. And he said, well, I'll tell you, Professor Powell, I've been here for 3 years. I'm an older, conservative white man, straight, in DC. I haven't had a date in 3 years. I am lonely. And it was real, right? Everybody's feeling disconnected. Everybody's feeling like, this is not my place. I'm losing it. And when there's a crack in the container, unless we get the container fixed, all bets are off. And so that's what we're watching happening to our democracy. And so we actually want to move beyond just the gap between people, which is what we do when we say equity. We take one group as a favorite group, and everybody else is less favored. And we say, let's close the gap between the favorite group and the less favored group. So if we take my friend who hasn't had a date, that means black men shouldn't date either. He's a white man, he's a straight man. Okay, so everybody stop dating. Or take the one in terms of suicide. For years, there's been effort to try to close the disparity between black men and white men in terms of suicide. Black men were killing themselves at a much higher rate. And with COVID and some other things, the good news is, well, maybe it's not good news, that disparity has almost disappeared. Black men and white men are killing themselves at almost the same rate. But not because black men are killing themselves less, but because white men are killing themselves more. So we just need a program to make sure white men go out there and kill yourself. Eliminate that gap between black men. Okay, you're not going to do that. I'm not advocating that. Forget I said that. The point is that it's not the disparity that's the gap. And when people saw that data, they were saying, wait a minute, that's not what we were advocating. we were advocating something different. So what were you advocating? We were advocating that no group should engage in committing suicide. Well, say that. Say our aspiration is not tied to any particular group. Our aspiration is something that everybody should strive to, but people may be situated differently on that aspiration. And that takes us in targeted universalism. So the goal is universal, something that every group should have. And oftentimes that's going to be groups we normally think of as marginalized groups or groups of color, but oftentimes it's also going to be whites. It's also going to be men. It's going to be people who you think of as in the favorite group. No group is in the favorite group all the time. And our concern is not just with the most marginalized group, our concern is with every group. So when we say we're just trying to close those disparities, we actually create a breaking frame. We're saying we care about some people and not other people. Or we say that we don't care about those people because they already have theirs. Well, maybe they do and maybe they don't. Look at the actual situation. You can't say someone has theirs because they're white. You can't say that someone has theirs because they're a man. You can't say that someone has theirs because they're straight. Because someone with all those characteristics can still be engaged in profound and deep suffering. And I'm at Berkeley now, but I came to Berkeley from the Ohio State, which is part of Appalachia. And I met a lot of white people who were suffering. And I'm not trying to recenter whiteness, let me be clear. What I am trying to center is our situatedness and suffering. And all of our suffering. I'm not saying it's the same, but it's real. So targeted universalism takes us to a different point. We start off with extreme equality. Go back, founding of this country. Virtually no country was organized around equality until France and the United States about 250 years ago. Kind of an amazing thing. Now, they didn't get it quite right, neither country, but it was an amazing thing to begin to say that people are equal. And it may not seem like a radical concept now, but it's extremely radical 250 years ago. And then, so as we started moving toward equality, people noticed that some people were not situated the same. So then we said, okay, equality is not quite getting at what we really want. So let's move to equity. And then again, equity, to the extent that it's just focused on disparities, was also problematic. So I'm suggesting we make another move to targeted universalism, which is universal goals, targeted strategies. Universal goals, targeted strategies. How do we get those universal goals? We co-create them. We say that all children should thrive. But some children are almost there, some children are a long way from there. And more often than not, it's racially coded. But we are concerned about all children. And we say that. And it not only becomes a programmatic approach to things, it becomes a communication approach to things. And then I say, I care about you, I care about you, and I care about you. And I can recognize that you're situated differently. And because I care about you, I'm going to take that into account. So the strategy is targeted. And how do I target it? Not based on how you look, but based on how you're situated. The situation is what's driving that. Now, two things. That may sound very radical. So, and maybe it is. But I remind people that when people from the West started embracing the idea of equality, you know who they made reference to? Not to me, not to some radical at Berkeley. They made reference to a guy named Aristotle. And Aristotle gave us our concept of equality. But no one reads Aristotle anymore. And what Aristotle said is that fairness and justice requires that when people are situated the same, you treat them the same. He called that arithmetic equality. But he also went on to say, justice and fairness requires when people are situated differently, you treat them differently. He called that geometric equality. So when people say, where'd you get that concept of target universalism? I say, Aristotle. So I don't remember him saying anything about it. He didn't have the language. So now we have a language. So those of you who are embracing targeted universalism, and I hope all of you are, you can call yourself Aristotelian. Or whatever you want to call yourself. So here are some examples of approaches some approaches are targeted, and if they're just targeted, they create problems. That if you say, I'm just going to focus on one group, and you don't explain why you focus on that group, you assume that that group is doing poorly. But another group doing poorly is excluded. So targeted approaches can create tension. Universal approaches ignore people's specificity, treat everybody the same. So we're not saying treat everybody differently, we're not saying treat everybody the same, we're saying there's a universal goal. How do you get everyone to that goal? We share in our concern for our children. We share in our concern for our parents. We share in our concern about people with disability. How do you actually articulate that so that everyone counts? So this is the heart of what we're talking about. Now the nice thing about this is it allows you to be particular and universal at the same time. It allows for you to acknowledge that yes, each one of us have a story. Each group has a story. I need to hear everybody's story. So the components of targeted universalism is getting every group to that universal. The way we practice equity, the idea is to get the most marginal group to the universal. Not every group. We want to get every group. And here are the steps for targeted universalism. And we have 6, you might have 7, you might have 5, but the idea is, we've already talked about, you co-create the universal goal, you assess where populations are, you assess their situatedness, you see how they're performing, you understand the structures, how they're promoting or holding back, you implement, and then you tell a story. The last part is important as well. Tell a story. We care about everybody, and we're doing this for this group because of how they're situated. And we're getting this group and this group and this group all to that universal. But each one of them will have a separate strategy based on how they're situated. And I was told I have 5 minutes, so I'm going to go quickly through these last few slides. So these are some examples of targeted universalism that's already happening around the country. There are many of them that are happening right here in San Diego. And in fact, when we get to question and answers, I may ask Wendy, who's my colleague sitting up front who helped, to talk about that because she's been here working with you on some of these things. TU also suggests we have to pay attention to who have power. So if we have co-creation, how do we make sure it's really co-created and not the loudest, biggest voice dominate? How do we make sure that everyone has a voice? Everyone can effectively participate. We have to pay attention to the power distribution. Because one thing power means is that you have more resources to articulate what you want.
the schedule?
Okay, thank you. I was just told I have 15 minutes now. Part of what's required in order for targeting universalism to work is to disaggregate the data. So you have to know how different groups are situated and how they're performing. And sometimes in our effort to be fair, we don't want to disaggregate the data. We did a lot of work on COVID when it first came out and throughout, but our first effort was, how are different groups doing? And almost everyone, liberal, conservatives, the medical profession, and others said, COVID is an equal opportunity virus. It treats every group the same. And my response was, this is the strangest virus we've ever seen, because that's never happened. And when we finally disaggregated the data, Michigan was the first state to disaggregate the data. People were shocked. It's like, wow, black people are dying at a faster rate than white people. Huh, curious. And the Surgeon General at the time, who was African American, said, what's going on? He said, you know what? Black people are just not behaving right. If they would stop misbehaving, exercise, eat a little less pork, put down the cigarettes, put down the liquor, then they would be dying at the same rate as everybody else. So when we saw that disparity, when we saw that there was some different outcomes, there are two moves, right? One is to say, what's wrong with that group that they're not performing like every other group? The other one was to say, how is that group situated in relationship to structure and culture compared to other groups? And it took us a while to turn that conversation to the story about how black people were situated. That's a big difference. And it's not just black people. So one of the solutions to COVID was wash your hands 20 times a day. And then they said, wait a minute, the Native American population doesn't have access to running water. How are they supposed to implement this plan? And then they say, if someone's not your friend or your family, keep 6 feet away from them. And then they noticed that Latinos who were farm workers were living in barracks right next to each other. And then they'd say, and make sure you go see your medical. And then they say, but some people living in rural America don't have access to the medical. So part of it is that they had flattened people's situatedness and just assumed that everybody was a 6'4" man trying to put luggage away on a plane. So part of it is the stories we tell. When we see these disparities, what do we do with them? Chicago public schools have developed an equity framework and index and are doing it in the context of targeted universalism. And here is something that I want to just pause for a moment on, because I know you're doing a lot of work in targeted universalism as well, and I applaud you on that. And hopefully that'll be a reason for me to come back to San Diego. But sometimes when people actually adopt the headlines, targeted universalism, the practice actually falls back into equity. That is, the goal of targeted universalism is getting every group to the universal, not just the most marginal. Not just the most marginal. So sometimes we'll say, we have targeted universalism, we want to get all of the BIPOC groups to the universal. I said, that's great. What about the non-BIPOC communities? Where do they fit in? And if you don't tackle that, you're back to a breaking story. You're saying there's a zero sum. If you're BIPOC, you get help. If you're not BIPOC, you don't get help. Now you might say, but the BIPOC need more help. Then give them more help. But more help is different than saying no help. You can justify more help because of how they're situated. Because I can tell you, again, the white folks I made contact with in Appalachia when I was in Ohio, they need, by most indication, more help than I do. They were dying earlier, they were not graduating. Their indicators were very similar to what we call concentrated poverty that Black America was experiencing. Identify the structures and systems that are getting in the way. not just the people. Be aware of the structures and system, and that's hard to do. Sometimes in this country we talk about being colorblind or gender blind. That's not happening. Because of the way the mind works, and I do a lot of work around the mind science, in a society where something's important, the unconscious just is on that like a dog on a bone. So, we may really believe, I'm not going to notice that person's race. And the unconscious is saying, y'all can do what y'all want to. We're having a meeting and we're going to talk about this. And as you don't know, the unconscious is much faster and much bigger than the conscious. I won't get into this because it's not part of the formal talk, but this is just an interesting factoid. The conscious mind processes 40 bits of information a second. And if you say, what's a bit? Ask ChatGPT. 40 bits of information a second. In that same second, the unconscious processes 11 million bits of information. All the work's being done at the unconscious level. And so while the conscious is busy taking its 40 bits, not noticing race and gender, the unconscious is cooking, taking its 11 million and making all kinds of judgments. Not because we're bad people, not because we're unconsciously racism. The unconscious learns by habituation. It learns from habit. And so if it gets stuff over and over again, like the dog, Pavlov's dog, you ring the bell, you feed the dog, you ring the bell, you feed the dog, you ring the bell. The dog is salivating. He knows food is coming. He doesn't thought it through consciously. This is how the unconscious works. So when we see stuff, hear stuff over and over and over and over again, we create these unconscious associations. So the point is that we can't but notice things that are important to our society at unconscious level. And it has a lot of implications. And that's why the Surgeon General initially said, well, if black people are dying early, it must be because they're acting up. That's the story that was readily available to him. So you have to pause and say, well, maybe something else is going on. What he didn't see, this is the Surgeon General, the top doctor in the United States. What he didn't see was the structure. He was structurally blind. And that's the mistake we happen over and over again. We don't notice the structure and the work the structure is doing. So part of it is to actually shift that. And design structures and programs to get all of us to that universal. Seattle Public School is doing a lot of work around targeting universalism and belonging. And then, of course, we have to develop stories. So we can't just work. We have to actually help communicate what it is we're doing. The stories is actually what brings us together. Remember I said there were two stories. There's the breaking story. Those people, it's their fault. And there's the bridging stories. We can do this together. So obviously I'm advocating that you engage in bridging stories. And hopefully in the question and answer, we'll have a chance to talk about some of the things that you're doing here. But I just want to say before I turn it back over to Crystal and others, that Crystal made a very interesting point. She said, if there's a crisis and you need to leave, what did she say to do? Take care of each other. Simple thing. In this country, oftentimes it's like, if there's a crisis, I'm taking care of me. I'm sorry, y'all got to get out the way. And that's not the right way. We have a crisis of isolation, a crisis of loneliness, a crisis of other, a crisis of fragmentation. That's all predicated on, I need to take care of me. Not recognizing that I cannot take care of me by myself. I used to, when I was a kid, I used to get up in the morning and say, oh, these diapers are dirty. Let me put on some clean diapers. Let me go heat up the baby for me, and I'm hungry. Let my mom and dad sleep in today. We need each other. And that's not a bad thing. When we come together, recognize each other, it's profoundly connecting. And we say, everyone, but everyone, in San Diego, in California, in the country and the world, everyone belongs. And we're going to organize our life that way. We're going to organize our programs that way. We're going to organize our stories that way. And that may seem like a stretch, but I'll end by just saying this. We actually were approached by, I think I can name them, a big foundation, a Midyar, and they said, okay, we like your work. We'd like to support it. Here's some money. Now that you have some money, if you had some more money and you had a moonshot, what would it be? And a moonshot, some of you are old enough to remember the moonshot, some of you are not. So let me just tell you what the moonshot was for those of you who are under 50. There was a space race between the United States and then the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union in 1962 sent a man around the Earth. And it freaked the United States out. That's when we had bomb shelters. We were getting ready for a nuclear war. Not really, but we said we were. I mean, said not really, because I'm in school, and they say, if there's a nuclear war, I'm probably 10 years old, 11 years old, put your head under the desk. I'm saying, what kind of nuclear war is this? Okay, whatever. But that's how we were preparing. But the Soviet Union sent a man around the Earth, and the United States freaked out because, like, now they can reach any part of the United States. Today, that every country can do that. But at the time, the Soviet Union was the first one, and we're like, are we going to get bombed? Are we going to get nuked? Should I buy an extra desk? And so what Kennedy did, President Kennedy, he gave a speech at Rice University. He didn't say anything about Soviet Union. He didn't even say anything about them sending a cosmonaut around the Earth. What he talked about is that before this decade is out, this is 1962, we're going to send a man, I think he said a man, to the moon and bring him back. We're going to build a rocket ship that's longer than this football field. He was speaking of the football field at Rice Stadium. We're going to use materials that don't exist yet. We're going to have to invent new materials, because when he went on and on, because when this person enters the Earth's atmosphere, the heat will be hotter than the sun. And we're going to do this within this decade. And some people say this is hard, maybe even impossible, but that's why we need to do it. That's who we are. When we come together, we can do the impossible. This is Kennedy talking. And then a few months later, he's giving a talk down in Florida, Cape Canaveral. And he sees this black janitor. He goes up to him and says, hello, I'm President Kennedy. My job is to keep the country running. Tell me your name. And the man said, my name is Fred Williams. And he said, Fred, what's your job? Why are you working here so late? The guy was a janitor, and he said, Mr. President, I'm trying to help us get a man to the moon. That was the moonshot. It inspired. It was a story about the future. It was a story about what we can do together. And so I believe that together, San Diego, you, the country, we can build a world where everybody belongs. And we could do it maybe before this decade is out. Thank you.
All right, all. Well, thank you so much for that round of applause. Whoa, for John. Gotta just take a minute and situate myself properly here. There's so many amazing things that came up in this conversation, in this talk. I hope you can agree. And we have a number of questions that were submitted by folks when the RSVP opportunity opened up, as well as being in conversation with community. And so we wanted to take a little bit of time for question and answer. We also will have mics circulating, and we'll see how many questions we can get to, but we will have another event in October where Professor Powell will return and be in another round of conversation with us. So we will have lots of opportunities to get to the questions, so please do make a note of them, share them with us, and we'll be sure to be able to explore the questions and the conversations together. So I have a couple that are printed out that I don't want to get wrong. So I will kick us off. Professor Powell, sometimes due to the profound needs needed to remedy harm or address structural concerns, groups may work within a scarcity mindset that can create siloing among groups. How does targeted universalism or this lens of belonging respond to this concern? And what does it look like to be able to operate from an abundance mentality as opposed to a scarcity mindset?
Well, that's a great question, and I'm sure, like probably all the questions I have, looked at them beforehand. It's a complicated question, but there's some reasons to be hopeful, I guess I would say. In some ways, I would say the thing that we lacked most in the United States and here in San Diego is a lack of belonging. And belonging is not zero-sum. The ability to care for each other is not parceled out. We can care for each other. Now, I know we're here and the foundation is giving away money, and your money, even though it's a lot, I think you said, someone said 40 or 50 million a year, is still, considering the scope of the problem, is not as much as it needs to be. But here's the thing. If people know that they're being considered and their concerns are being taken into account, all of a sudden, the pie begins to grow. When people feel like this is about somebody else and not about my group, and I got to take care of my own group needs, the pie begins to shrink and the needs begin to grow. I'll give you a concrete example. The Sacramento Foundation, a few years ago, was implementing targeted universalism. And they did a study that looked at children dying or being at birth because, frankly, the mother rolled over in the middle of the night and suffocated them. And can you imagine something more traumatizing than waking up in the morning to find your child is not breathing, your 2 or 3-week-old baby? And so they decided to address this problem. And in doing so, they found that the Black community was experiencing this 5 times more likely than the white, Latino community 3 times more likely than white, and they didn't have enough resources for everyone. Thank you. So they decided that I missed. They decided they would focus on the Black community, and there was internal tension within the foundation. So we just simply don't have enough money to do it for everybody. And so they called me back in to help resolve the tension. And I said, so what do you know, this is targeted universalism. What will you do? We don't have enough resources for everybody. And I said, okay, what I would do is, to some extent, distribute the money proportionally. So you may have 5 times as much money going, and the money is just one indicator, there are other things as well. But you have 5 times the resources going to the Black community, 3 times the resources going to the Latino community, and some small portion of the community resources going to the white community. They eventually did that. Once they did that, the larger community that had not been participating in this program poured money in because they felt like it was a program that actually took care of the needs of the entire community. And this is a happy ending story, but also a true story. They end up having enough resources for all the communities. And I have no doubt in my mind that if they're just focused on the Black community, not only would they have ignored those other 2 communities, they would not have had enough resources for the Black community. So part of it is a mindset. It's to say, and again, the communication, we care about everybody. We can't do everything for everybody, but we're going to try. We're not going to totally ignore some group in favor of some other group. I think that's a very difficult frame to hold. That's a breaking frame. And so I say, yes, we need to switch to an abundant frame, but also a frame that's inclusive, to make sure that everyone and everyone's suffering is part of the frame.
You've raised this question of what it looks like to be a funder. And so I'm curious what you've learned as funders have worked within the targeted universalism frame. It may influence community organizations to describe their work in a different way, either for a grant report or a proposal. But targeted universalism can do much more than that. And so I'm hoping you might be able to speak to us about the meaningful advantages of what targeted universalism offers, especially to groups working with frontline communities.
So actually, I was a funder for for a little while, about 10 years. I was the chair of the Tides organization, which part of it was a small foundation. But for the most part, I've been on the other side, not as a funder, but as a grantee. And so I think different institutions have different institutional constraints. But I see us, in a sense, all being on the same team with different roles. So some people are, in government, that's one role, responsive to voters. Some people are in the community, that's a different role, responsive to your immediate community. Some people are in philanthropy. But it seems to me we're all trying to get to the same place, a society where everyone thrives, where everyone belongs. And there's a whole concept now called trusted philanthropy, where the foundations are listening to the community and moving toward co-creation. Listening doesn't mean co-creation, but it's a move in that direction. And to listen is really, really good. To co-create is better. And I want to just say, in terms of co-creating, it doesn't mean ceding your responsibility to the community. Mm-hmm. You have particular responsibility. I teach at a university, and the university has its own guardrails. So sometimes the staff will say, we should do X. And I say, we'd love to, but the university says, no, we have to sort of stay within the guardrails until we change them. So it should be an iterative process. It should be a process back and forth. And a lot of foundations from the 90s to today has sort of shifted from individualized approach to structural approaches. It's complicated in the sense that you have information that most of your grantees don't. At the same time, you don't want to be, the sort of the outside expert that comes into the community saying, we have money and we're going to tell you how to fix your problem. That doesn't work. Because part of the problem is lack of agency and lack of voice. So what a lot of foundations have done is say, okay, we are going to let the community decide. I'm not advocating that either. It needs to be iterative. You need to show up with what you know, what you believe, but also elicit from them what they know and what they believe, mm-hmm. and they have the capacity to actually engage. And it's complicated. I'll give you one concrete example. I was working with Detroit when they were going through the bankruptcy. Detroit was the largest city to experience bankruptcy in recent years. Wendy was there working on that as well. And they were appropriately obsessed with bankruptcy. And while I was working, we sort of stumbled upon something that wasn't on the table. And it was the water crisis. And it hadn't happened. And a good researcher, from my perspective, is like a weather person. You're actually looking at the weather, not just today, you're looking at it tomorrow and the day after tomorrow, the next week. If you only warn people of a hurricane when it hits, you're a terrible weather person. They need some time to prepare. So we started going back to the community and saying, you know what? We think we can solve the bankruptcy problem if we fix the water problem. Because Detroit actually had a monopoly over the water, and it actually cleaned and purified the water for a third of Michigan. And if properly scaled, it would produce billions of dollars a year. And people kept saying to us, why do you keep talking about water? We don't have a water problem, we have a bankruptcy problem. And I said, well, you have a water problem too, and the water problem could solve the bankruptcy problem. We failed. They basically said, okay, we know you do whatever you do at Berkeley, but We brought you to here to focus on bankruptcy. You know, we're not talking about water. We go to Detroit now several times a year, and the number one thing we've been working on for the last 3 or 4 years is water. Yep. So I say that to say, we could have said, let the community decide. Oftentimes we say, people know what's best for themselves. Not true. They know something about themselves. I go to the doctor and I say, I need some prescription Tums because I have gas. I say, I have heartburn because I have gas. I ate something last night. It's really burning my heart. I know my body, right? The doctor gives me Tums and I go home and have a heart attack. My children might be upset. Maybe they won't be, I don't know. But anyway, they might call up the doctor and say, she failed. It's like, my father came to see you and you gave him Tums? And she might say, that's what he asked for. He knows his body. I did know the symptoms, but that's all I knew. And I didn't have a fancy machine to do an echocardiogram or whatever the doctors do. And so I'll just give that as an example. We are like patients in that respect. We know some things about ourselves, but not everything. I don't know what my blood pressure is right now. I think it's probably pretty cool right now. But so what I'm saying is that how do you go back and forth as a foundation? How do you make it porous in your relationship with the community, with the city, as you sort of, and if this idea of targeting universalism, and I think it's a wonderful idea. Actually, I was on the phone this morning telling my office to call the Biden administration and tell them to shift to targeting universalism. No, really. Because I think the way they actually promote equity actually is breaking. I think it contributes not only to the political fragmentation, it makes them less effective. It actually decreases their power. But the point I'm making is that they may say no. They may have 100 reasons why it won't work. We have to engage them. But I can't just sit back and say, well, they're the government and he's the president. They should know. They've actually reached out to us at different times and said, tell us what you think we should do. And we're willing to do that virtually anyone, whether they call themselves a Democrat or Republican, conservative or liberal, or another country. But I think you have to be willing to do that as well, being in a position of learning with your cohorts as a foundation, even while you adhere to your role of your benefactor and your legal constraints as a foundation.
Fantastic. So John, our last question for today. When we talked at the beginning of this year, you mentioned being impressed with some powerful examples of work around belonging here in San Diego. And so I would like to ask you to close us with some examples of what you have particularly admired as we sit in this place here together. And I know that Wendy might get pulled in for this question as well.
Yes. So Wendy, if you could stand up. So I'm going to ask Wendy to take the mic. So, I have a fairly large staff, and we work literally all over the world, which means oftentimes I don't really know what my staff is doing. And then I read about it. It's like, wow, this is really cool. We're doing this. So Wendy's been here working in San Diego. She sent me a bunch of materials about some of the cool things you're doing. And I said, why should I talk about that? You should talk about that because you're involved. So Wendy, if you could share some of the stuff that you sent me, but also some of the work you're doing here.
Yeah, hello everyone. It's good to see some of you. I recognize familiar faces.
And Wendy, if I could ask you to stand up again.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I like to stay cozy. But it's good to see everyone. Thanks for coming. So we worked a lot with talking to a lot of community members and doing outreach for the Office of Equity and Racial Justice at the county. Yeah, there you are. And in doing that, it wasn't just about the office. We just started some of the mission statement work, but we talked to hundreds of different community organizations here, talked to all of the leaders that were on the Human Rights or the Human Relations Commission there. And it was really beautiful to just get a sense, one, of like the hunger and interest in trying to find bridging and belonging as an aspiration, because of recognizing extreme fragmentation that more people have become aware of in the recent decade, but has been happening and really taking root for a much longer time than that. And then also seeing a lot of the really great work that's being done within the community organizations for different communities, different cities and places around the whole county. And again, aspiring to something more than just a solution. So thinking of some of the schools that are operated for specific groups. There was a young man who was in one of the videos talking about the schools who said that he was failing math. He was also getting suspended from a school frequently. So like the most extreme expression of othering, just getting kicked out. And he said, now I'm in the school and I'm getting the good math grades, I'm learning algebra. But there was a lot more going on behind that effort and behind that data measurement. So yes, it's about seeing these outcomes, these measurements from TU. TU's outcomes oriented. But it's about more than that. So behind the problem of specific data problem, there's an understanding that is deeper than that. So in one way, understanding all of that is a success. The other is that there's an understanding from the community that government can play a role in this and is playing a role in this more and more. Expectations around that are really successful. So yeah, spirit around it, recognition of the need, and then practical efforts to get there has been really great to see.
And let me just add a couple of things to Wendy. So I looked at your education program, and you have 6 different groups. And now just looking at it online, but it looks like what you're saying is that these groups, first of all, are situated differently, and they need different interventions. And you have a universal goal, making sure all young people can thrive. So you have a universal goal, and you recognize that, again, there are different groups with different situations and therefore need different interventions. I think the human resources group was sort of looking at the difficulty of people bridging, coming together and talking to each other and understanding each other. It was interesting though, in terms of reading on your website, they're saying, and therefore we can address the problem. I didn't see what the problem articulated. I'm sure maybe everybody knows, but just as an outsider, it wasn't clear to me. So it seems to me both in terms of target universalism and in terms of belonging, those concepts are starting to affect how you approach your work. You know, I have some thoughts as to how you might even ground it more deeply. And, you know, sort of a, I guess, what do they call them? Spoilers alert. I'm never satisfied. So don't be surprised if you say, we did exactly what you said. And I said, great, now you need to do something else. But until everyone really feels they belong and everyone is thriving, our work is not done. So I think it's an orientation rather than a destination.
Thank you for that, John. I absolutely appreciate that. And really this concept of how we move from the us and them to a we or a new us, as you talk about, and a call for us to all be able to do that. I'd like to invite everybody to thank Professor Powell with me once now. Okay, so many microphones. Is this one on? No, you can totally stay. Does that work now? Yes, excellent. So before we wrap, please don't leave yet. We want to be able to share an announcement with you. which is that we are launching a new Leaders in Belonging initiative today, which will provide $100,000 each, unrestricted award, to 5 fierce community advocates who are working to identify, transform, and eliminate barriers to inclusion, justice, and sustainability in San Diego. Thank you. We are so excited about this. It is going to be an annual award that is designed to provide leaders with vital support that will allow them to be able to continue their work and build momentum for change. Now, we know that true leaders often go beyond their job descriptions to address the challenges that they see. And this is a way for us to thank 5 at a time each year for all of the unseen, and frankly, let's name it, unpaid labor that has often gone into identifying and naming unjust systems, creating actionable solutions and plans to build belonging, and galvanizing the community and the ecosystems around them. And what we hope to do in lifting up these stellar examples of San Diegans who are our leaders in belonging is recognizing the work and inspiring more people to take up the risk and to be courageous with us. We aim to tackle core challenges by following those who lead with community wisdom and chart solutions, and we are going to be listening to community wisdom in this process. We will have nominators from all across San Diego who will submit recommendations for the initiative's inaugural class of 5 recipients next month, and we will very proudly and very excitedly share them with you this fall, inviting them to be on stage with Professor Powell on an event on October 3rd, where we'll be able to listen and learn from the ways that they are doing their work as well. We are dedicated, I hope you can see, to strengthening, we're dedicated, sorry, lost that my thread there, to creating an inclusive, equitable, and dynamic future for all San Diegans. And we really believe that investing in and celebrating these leaders will strengthen and protect their efforts, their community networks, and their contributions to creating a more connected and welcoming region. We're really eager to learn from them and to celebrate them, and we hope that you will be as well. Crystal would kill me if I didn't tell you that there will be more information on our website. It's probably already live this morning, prebysfdn.org. And thank you again for being here to hear about this initiative that we are so excited to launch. Thrilled with the staff that has put so much work into this, our board who has really been behind this, and really looking forward to being able to see who is nominated and which 5 inaugural members of our cohort we will be able to introduce to you this fall. And so with that, I would love to invite Grant back out to close us out for today.
Thank you, Kaveri. All right, we're almost done. Let's see if this is on. Is this on? Okay, we're almost done. So I just want to reflect for a moment and say it's a lot. You've just heard a lot. You've just had an incredible seminar in some principles of how we can approach the challenges and the opportunities that we've described. And we've taken in the fact that we're operating in a society and in a moment where there's tremendous fragmentation and feeling of dissolution and distance. What this current Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy, has declared a crisis of loneliness and disconnection in our society. And we all have the opportunity to begin to change and rebuild that. And what Professor Powell did for us so masterfully was lay out some of the ways in which we can do it. And it feels, on one level, really complex when you reflect on everything that you've heard, but then it comes down to simple acts of, and I love this language, Professor Powell, of the simple acts of recognizing each other's humanity and then reaching out in ways that build connections and build connectivity. And that's a beautiful goal that I think probably everybody in this room, regardless of how you feel about the many complexities of our society, can probably agree is a good thing. Core to the whole idea of this country yet unrealized. So a lot of work and a lot of tremendous opportunity that should make us feel motivated and excited about the opportunity that we have to get to do this extraordinary work together. And I would just like to have a round of applause for John, for you. Thank you again. I do also want to say that as we do this work, San Diego, like the rest of the country, like the rest of the world, is changing. And we're all hopefully going to move with that change and help make it be what we want it to be and as powerful as we think it could be. I am inspired by the idea that San Diego, sitting in this unique part of the world that we do, on a border, at the confluence of so many different forces in our society, can be the place that actually figures this out. And why shouldn't we, in this community, be the very best? When you deal with, yeah, let's applaud that. What? I also want to underscore what you heard a little bit about with respect to a zero-sum game. So often when we get into conversations like this, more and more in our culture, it's, well, if you do that, it will take away from me. Or if you do that, it will take away from people I care about or things I care about. And I think the takeaway that we hope you have from today is, if we do this work, if we lean into belonging well, and if we as a foundation do it by listening and then co-creating and actually working in concert with all of you to make it happen, if we do that, let me ask you, who wins? Who wins? Little loud. Yeah, everybody. This is a formula for our country to move forward, for our community to move forward. It is about all of us. And this is, I think, the most precious part of the takeaway from this conversation today. So thank you. We look forward to doing this again in October, and we'll be having many conversations in the meantime. And now I want to hand it back to Crystal to say what's next.
Just logistics. So first of all, thank all three of you, Professor Powell, Kiberi, Grant, thank you all. Feel free to go grab your food early if you'd like. Nydia's waiting for you right over there. Check in back in. Thumbs up if you're great. Middle thumb if you're so-so. Down if you're like horrible. This sounds horrible. Okay, great. Awesome. Quick question for y'all. How many of you have been to an event with the Conrad Prebys Foundation before? Please raise your hands. Okay, we're going to continue to grow. We're probably going to have to go to a bigger venue next time. So please go to prebysfound.org. Join us there. How many of you have met the person sitting next to you? Awesome. You all are just way ahead of the game. Okay, so now's the chance. We're going to go to the courtyard, but again, no stampeding. Help one another, okay? There's all kinds of food. We've had events where people didn't realize the food was for them. The food is for you. Okay, seriously, take the food. What I love about working with this foundation is we really want people to experience kindness, connection, but also nice things. We all deserve nice things when we can, and we want to share that with others. Valet is open until 2:15, and I want to acknowledge if she's here somewhere. Nancy, are you here? Okay, if you haven't met Nancy, Nancy answers the front phone. She manages the office. She keeps all of us on track with project management. And Siri doesn't understand. There's Nancy. Thank you, Nancy. And she's graceful about it the whole time. We're very lucky to get to work with Nancy. I just want to flag for you, we're going to send an email back out with a survey. We want all of your honest feedback. If you didn't have an accommodation you need, I know we need to add translation services, interpretation services. Those things are coming to the next event. But please go enjoy some food, bring out your business card, share your ideas, start chatting. We'll be out there for a while, and then we have to continue working. We have to go debrief with Grant, because Grant's the boss. Right, Grant? Something like that. We'll talk. But please make your connections. Have a wonderful day. Our hashtag Tasia, our hashtag Get social with Tasia is here somewhere. Is BelongingSD, is that our right hashtag? Hashtag BelongingSD on all platforms. Please share the message, and we look forward to connecting with you again soon. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.